Maybe wondering where our last speaker is, because he doesn't seem to have a chair. And indeed, he doesn't have a chair. He's in New York, and I don't know if he's going to magically... He is. He appears. Congratulations. So, Bob, how are you?
I'm feeling fine. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Great. Well, Bob McKinnon is founder and director of the GaleWill Center for Opportunity and Progress. He's got some amazing ideas and initiatives. He's very well known in the US media, and I'm sure after this evening he's going to be well known in the UK media. I'm particularly intrigued by his initiative called Actions Speak Loudest, Keeping Our Promise for a Better World, which very much resonates with what Kate's been talking about earlier this evening. So, Bob, you have the floor, or the screen.
Well, thank you. First of all, I have to say, I hope I look at least a modest percentage better on the screen where you're saying than I do. I know I'm fairly washed out in general, but this is pretty hard for me to look at a giant picture of myself. So, you know, thank you for having. Do you want me to just sort of speak generally, or Tim, did you have a question you wanted to start with?
Shall I start, Bob, off? Bob, we were very much taken by your Huffington Post article from slacktivism to activism. And you talked about the very large amount of information that's now shared through social media and how easy it is to click in the current age. So really my question to you is, do you see this as a revolution, or are you concerned there is something disempowering about the sheer volume of information that is being shared now?
Yeah, you know, I think that the fear is that we don't necessarily have the right foundation for a conversation. So the bottom line is that we have access to information like we never had before. You have the ability to see things inside of a company or inside of an organization where you previously weren't able to. But foundationally, there are certain things that need to be in place in any relationship for that kind of sharing of information to be productive. So, you know, I love my wife very much, but I'm not sure if I would want her to know everything I was thinking or doing at any time in the day. But that is the expectation that we have somehow set up. There was a recent Gallup poll that looked at countries across the globe and asked them, the average citizen, to what extent did they think that there was corruption in the businesses in that country. And the average across all the countries was over 60%. So you're starting from a point where people in the citizenry are skeptical of an organization's actions. Yet you're asking the corporations then to be transparent. When we unfortunately sometimes act in a very sort of got you kind of environment. So, you know, I've had examples, for example, working with National Geographic, which is a wonderful organization that does so much good for the Earth and for the planet. But I remember when we were working to develop a campaign to sort of promote preservation, that they were reticent because they just knew that at some point someone was going to say, well, why isn't the magazine printed on recycled paper? Now, they had probably the most responsible reforestation practices on the planet at that time, but they knew they'd be called into question. And I read something recently which alluded to the fact that it's really hard to communicate not doing as much bad as I used to. And that's the mentality sometimes that we are met with. So there's not a foundation of trust that exists. There's not a foundation in terms of an explanation of motivation. So we expect Walmart to be green because green is being right. And when they say that, it somehow rings inauthentic. But when they tell us that they can save a lot of money in their supply chain by changing the kinds of bulbs that they sell, then all of a sudden that feels more authentic because the motivation is honest. But generally speaking, we don't come to grips very easily with the fact that there is a fiduciary responsibility that corporations have to make profit. And unfortunately, that emphasis sometimes is more on the short term than the long term, which makes these kinds of things very complicated. But we're not honest about that. I remember at one point I was working on a campaign to deal with obesity, and a friend of mine came down and said, look at this new food product that our client is introducing. And the product was a sausage wrapped in a pancake that you dip in syrup. And I said, that's awful. And I said, you know what I'm working on? I'm working on this obesity thing. He goes, yeah, but it's only meant to be consumed in moderation. And the reality is no company sets out to launch a moderately successful product. So we're not honest about our motivations. And then the third thing is I think the context, which is to say that, you know, just the sheer amount of information does not really help people. It allows them to go sort of fishing for facts that maybe fit into frames in which they already have, but doesn't really give them a context for understanding that. And we saw that, for example, with the Coney episode, where you had a lot of people sharing information without the proper context to evaluate it. So again, I think that on one hand, it is great generally to be transparent and open, but if you don't have the foundational elements of being, trusted, of being, knowing what the other party's motivation is, or sort of understanding, what is the context for what I'm learning, you create, I think, a really disturbing ecosystem for the sharing of the information.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Well, look,